See who's on the list. So joining us on stage today, we've got, where are you? Rick Kelly from Fuel Cycle, Kate from Gut Check, Alina Hallinan from Irrational Agency, Adam Froman from Delvania, Methodify, and I actually don't have a fifth panelist on my list.
He's right there.
There you are.
Michael Chuba from Shapiro Raj.
Shapiro Raj, awesome. Thanks for joining us, guys. So to kick things off, I don't know if anyone remembers the themes from the GRIT report this year, but there were 4 major themes that came out in the report. The first, and this is not a huge surprise since nearly 50% of the sample came from the US and we tend to live in peaceful oblivion here, but GDPR was not a concern for most people. I know many folks in the US do business just in the US, and so GDPR wasn't high on their list, but I was a little surprised to see that there wasn't more focus on GDPR and that most folks were blissfully unaware. So we won't be discussing that on the panel today, but I do want to talk about some of the other themes that kind of flowed throughout the report. As I mentioned earlier this morning, holy blockchain. If you have not heard anything about blockchain at this conference, you obviously haven't been into any sessions. I feel like every other session was blockchain. Interestingly enough, but not really surprising, most folks are kind of taking a wait-and-see approach to blockchain. I was talking with someone last night about the fact that we've been talking about mobile for nearly 10 years and still mobile adoption in research seems to be pretty sparse. So I'm guessing 10 years from now we might be talking about blockchain as well. But I did want to kind of kick things off with you, Rick, because we were talking about blockchain last night.
We were, yeah.
And particularly as it relates to sampling, I know we had a conversation about that, and that's another kind of key theme of the GRIT report.
Yeah, so I think I ended up writing the blockchain commentary in the GRIT report. And so first of all, I'm very bullish on blockchain concepts. I own Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple. I follow it all. Dave Carruthers and I, over at VoxPop.me, trade notes on, which cryptocurrency is doing well. And obviously there's a large increase in public awareness of blockchain. And so I actually wrote like a very kind of bearish stance on blockchain and market research, because I think blockchain could solve a lot of issues, especially like Ethereum-based, like smart contracts and data management and privacy and authentication. But the issue with blockchain is that it's not really mature. I would guess that probably less than 3% of this audience owns any cryptocurrency or manages cryptocurrency. And that's because it's a real pain in the ass to manage. And until user friendliness increases and it's easier for panelists, for users like the general public to manage blockchain and everything, I think that's going to be a while before it takes full root inside the market research industry. I think it's going to happen, but I think it's probably going to be 5 to 10 years before we see all the use cases play out and before usability improves sufficiently.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. It's interesting too, I don't know, particularly this came out in the startup competition, but there was a lot of focus on blockchain as it relates to sampling, and I thought one of the interesting things from the GRIT report and one of the trends that we're seeing is that everyone, the majority of folks still feel like sample quality is an issue and actually getting worse. But most folks don't want to impact cost or study design, which are of course major factors in respondent satisfaction and the quality of data we receive. So I'd love to actually hear from you, Michael, about sampling quality and how that has, how do you feel like that's impacting the industry and the work that you guys do at Shapiro Raj?
There's a lot of professional respondents out in the world. In fact, I remember when I first started, when I was a young pup interviewing doctors, I had this ophthalmologist who'd showed up to about 5 of my focus groups for $150. I'm like, you're not rich enough? What's going on here? So yeah, I do think that the quality of sample is always going to be an issue. We've interviewed the country at least 80 times over. People are kind of clued in, and I think it's about finding more interesting ways of having conversations and surveying people. Some of the things we talk about biasing lenses through questions and stuff like that. that's just stuff that we continue to have to work through, and I think it's really about having a more human engagement. I find that, referring to people as respondents sounds very clinical and cold. I think these are human beings, and we're trying to understand them. And I think the way that we try to approach things is, you're talking to somebody, how can you have an interesting conversation that's going to lead to some really, really interesting and problem-solving oriented answers? So those are the kinds of things you just have to navigate and kind of deal with on a case-by-case basis in many respects.
Yeah. I thought one of the other interesting trends in the report is that although clients really haven't changed their business spend, if you look at smaller agencies, in particular smaller agencies that are driven by tech solutions, their business is growing rapidly. And I thought that was kind of an interesting finding, because it means that some of the larger firms are being cannibalized, I guess, by the smaller firms. And what was also interesting is that many of the folks up here on today's panel, it's their debut on the Grit Report, and including Alina, who runs a smaller agency based overseas in the UK. And so I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on how you see the industry changing, particularly for smaller firms that are focused on hot topics like behavioral change.
Well, I think there's been an exponential interest in the past couple of years in behavioral science. I remember coming here 4 years ago and there was hardly anything, anything about it. It was a couple of talks. Whereas now you go to any conference and half of them are talking about behavioral science, or at least want to. I think for a small company like us, automation is in partly artificial intelligence and machine learning. All these tech advancements are a real blessing, because it allows smaller companies to scale up and kind of do things more efficiently, whereas in the past you would have needed a bigger agency and lots of manpower to do them.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about automation, because that's kind of like the final and kind of one of the bigger themes of the report is how much automation is accelerating and impacting the industry. And I know both Adam and Kate, you guys work in organizations that are focused on automation and agile research methods, and I'd love to hear from the two of you some thoughts on how you see automation not only just changing your own business, but how you interact with clients and how that's really changing the industry.
I think first, in terms of the Grit Report, it was really interesting. It was no surprise, because we've been really getting in the automation space for about 3 years now in Canada. But what the Grit Report said is, if you're thinking about awareness, and you see it at the conference, there's a ton of awareness around automation. The challenge we find in this in the stats in the Grit Report that talk about the use, that was pretty flat or even declined. I think where I was confused by that is that I understand the adoption is still low, but the testing has gone crazy this year. And it's part of a transition between an industry that's very transactional and project-oriented, but the essence of automation is really going to be more of an enterprise-type solution. And we're kind of going through this process that we're hand-holding clients, that we're investing. There's a lot of great automation tools out there. You see them here. There's a lot of platforms like ours. But the impediment right now is really this paradigm shift that's going amongst companies. And the fear that we're past the fear we're going to lose our job, but the fear of sort of how do I use it? And I think it's an obligation for companies like ours to actually step up and guide clients and invest in that, because in another year, if we don't see that growth, it'll be something's wrong with the Grit Report. But we're seeing that tip over now. But there's still a little bit of resistance in terms of not knowing what to do. But most of that is just about not trying it. So I think you're going to see this year, particularly, companies really taking on that transformational change and an ownership of it to help sort of client-side researchers to understand, what does automation mean, and how does these automation technologies, how are they going to change the way they think and make decisions? And it's kind of exciting because we're right in the middle of it. Yeah. But it's a little tiring because we all want to make money at the same time.
Okay.
So we've really started to invest in automation as well. And we find, I agreed with in the grit report, it seemed very flat, but I think some of the automation techniques are kind of we're at some of the table stakes now, so automating, simple charts, bars, things like bar graphs, things along those lines. We might not even think about that like that as automation anymore. But what we're thinking now is we want to use automation to get some of those easier type of insights so we can really dive in deep and answer the problem. So what I found in the grit report, it was really funny to me that as suppliers, we think we're knocking it out of the park, and the clients are saying, well, you're not always knocking it out of the park. And I thought that was really interesting. And I think automation will really help us get there and with a build on strategic thinking and help our clients get really deeper insights is what automation should be doing. It should take some of the day-to-day tasks out of it and help your research teams really dig into the actual client problem and be able to answer that in a more holistic way.
What you said is making me think, and actually remember back to about 10 years ago when we all moved to online, and we probably said the same thing. It's going to, faster data collection is going to allow us to do more thinking. All it's allowed us to do is to have more client pressure, complete projects faster, and it hasn't actually let us have any more time to think. Not very much. It's a bit like, and the same thing that when you had washing machines, dishwashers came to, became mainstream. It's like, oh, women will have so much time to do all this other stuff. No, we don't. We just
have any time to do anything.
Yeah, exactly. But it's I think automation, that was a danger that, once we realize that, we can do things so much faster, and we'll have clients go, great, can you do that in a week? And it's like, okay, but we're also human beings that try to be researchers, and I think there's a danger that we'll do exactly the same thing as we did with online. Just do it faster and, not actually increase quality.
Yeah. That's what that's what we're trying to tackle too, is really increase the quality of not only of the results, but of the data as well. And we're hoping that automation will help that. You're right, though.
Absolutely.
The adoption is difficult, as we just talked about.
Yeah. Sorry, Rick, did you want to?
Well, I was going to say that I think sometimes when we talk a lot about the technologies and the methods, we forget that, or sometimes it's easy to forget that it's really about problem solving, and problems can be solved in many different ways through many different means. I came to this industry about a few years ago. I mean, in earnest, I spent 26 years in the ad agency business as a strategist and planner, and it was all about figuring out how to solve a client's problems with creative solutions. Same thing applies to research. It's how do you solve a problem with creative information and research techniques and strategies and whatnot. So it's getting beyond just the tools, and it's understanding what our larger mission is and how we apply those tools to that. I think is a real key conversation piece. It can sometimes get lost in all this.
Rick?
Yeah, and just to add on to the kind of flat growth in automation, something might be wrong with the grit report. It might just be that the survey is still not mobile responsive 10 years in.
We talked about that last night.
We did, yes.
Point of frustration.
Yeah, I think last year I got in trouble for saying, why the fuck are we still talking about mobile? And this year, that was last year. This year I'm saying, why are we still talking about mobile? And I feel like automation is going to be the same thing, where in 10 years, these are going to be table stakes, basic expectations. I think every technology company that's here is looking at automation because, we understand it provides speed and scale. And for the adoption rate, I think it's incumbent upon us as suppliers to the industry, as partners to the industry, to provide real education and go beyond marketing speak and flashy websites, which I love, and we have a nice flashy website too. But really focusing on providing education. Helping our customers and partners understand what this enables them to do and the benefits that are realized. I think there's a real lack of a cohesive explanation of what AI provides to the industry, what automation provides, other than faster projects. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Michael, I want to close just with a question to you. I think you probably represent one of the larger and more traditional research firms. How do you advise other full-service firms to kind of stay ahead of the curve? We've got all these hot tech companies and folks that are focused on agile and automation, new methods. What do you guys do at Shapiro-Raj to just kind of stay ahead of the curve?
We think of ourselves as the oldest new kid on the block. I mean, we've been around for 60 years, but we've been evolving our model over the past few. It's still a work in progress, but I think a few things that we do, obviously, we're looking to adopt a lot of the technologies, and, you know, depending on the size of your firm and the level of investment you can make, sometimes you have to partner with other folks. So we're building those kinds of capabilities. At the same time, it's all about the human beings that we involve. So as I mentioned, I come from the ad industry, and we're bringing more people like me into that world. And the reason is because as somebody who was around the block for 26 years, doing a lot of different projects with a lot of different brands, you can start to smell what the problems are kind of right off the bat. And you almost start from an outcomes-based approach that then helps you feed a lot of things into that to say, are you right, are you wrong, where can this go? And a lot of the conversation this morning about iterative, we're building a lot of processes that help us be very agile, nimble, and iterative. We're not doing the same focus group for an entire week. We're changing the guide, we're changing the questions, we're changing the project at times. So we're trying to keep ourselves nimble, as well as making sure that we're doing analysis in real time, so you get a report that doesn't take 6 weeks. I found that extremely annoying. On the other side of the glass, I don't want to be part of the problem, I want to be part of the solution. So we're working on that. We're literally, at times, we can get people substantive reports within like 2 to 3 days of close of field. So we're working on all those kinds of things to help service our clients better, and that's a big part of our innovation strategy.
Great. Well, as it turns out, a 20-minute panel goes by super fast with 5 people. So I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. They'll be hanging out through the break. If you have questions about any of the key themes in the GRIT report, I think these are the folks to talk to, whether it's about sampling or blockchain or automation. Yeah, there's lots of interesting trends going on in the industry today. So thank you, panelists.